Let's talk about the lockdown files, the latest on, well, just the extraordinary revelations from the WhatsApps that were sent to and from Matt Hancock during the pandemic period. The latest revelations on the front of the Telegraph today. Hancock rejected plan to cut isolation. A message from Chris Whitty suggesting a pilot taking the 10 days isolation down to just testing for 5 days instead of having to isolate all that time. Bearing in mind, lots of people missing out on holidays, work, not being able to get... Hey, Matt Hancock gets paid whether he goes to work or not, whether he's in the Australian jungle or not. But a lot of people don't. And basically saying, look, it's not necessary and we're going to go down to, you know, on medical advice, 5 days. Matt Hancock's reply, well, no, he says, so I think moving to 7-day daily testing for contacts would be a huge for adherence, as in people were more likely to obey it rather than the 14 days, which they weren't sticking to. But going below that would seriously worry people and imply we'd been getting it wrong. Once again, evidence that he was making decisions not based on scientific evidence, not based on the advice from his advisors, but simply because, well, it would look better that way. This, by the way, after he had spent, along with the rest of the government and their advisors, basically, you know, a year and a half trying to scare the living daylights out of us. The actual phrase, frighten the pants out of us, was what Matt Hancock said. Well, let's talk about this with a woman who's, well, highlighted just what was happening very early on in the pandemic. Laura Dodsworth is the author of the brilliant book, A State of Fear, How the UK Government Weaponised Fear During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Good morning to you, Laura.
Good morning.
It's a great treat to me to be able to talk to you because you're always on Mike's show, so I don't get to talk to you very often, but I'm absolutely delighted to have you on the show. Your book was a big wake-up call to a lot of people. I fear, alas, that the wake-up call from the lockdown files is sort of almost coming too late in lots of ways. So many people are entrenched in their mindset that, look, hundreds of thousands of people would have died if we hadn't done what the government did. They were doing what they had to do, and they were right to do it at the time. But your book revealed, and your work subsequently revealed, that actually a lot of the time they were very deliberately using scare tactics and telling us that we were all going to die for sort of political reasons rather than to keep us safe and rather than certainly basing it on the science.
I think you're absolutely right. These lockdown files are very revelatory and hugely painful. Obviously for Matt Hancock, who's not come out of this very well at all. Also for other individuals such as Simon Case, for the whole of the government, but also for all of us. Because if there were any lingering naysayers who didn't want to admit that they had been deliberately conned into being more frightened than they necessarily should be, then I think they need to put those doubts aside now, because the lockdown files show in black and white that sometimes our ministers were making it up on the hoof and talking as well, let it be said, in a very sanctimonious and unpleasant manner about the British people, laughing at us, but also talking quite deliberately about plans to scare us. They did it with the scariant. Do you remember that term, scariant, the Kentish variety, where what they did was really amplify and exaggerate the risk in order to justify the cancellation of Christmas, which was something that they were really already set upon. The way they talk about masks highlights that masks were really much more of a signal than based on any evidence. And the casual way they talk about imposing masks in schools is so disrespectful to all the children who had impeded communication and learning and social skills as a result. Let's talk about the fines, and well, not the fines, but the police getting heavy. Now, it's come out today that self-isolation could have been much shorter, 5 days. And there's a few things to say about this. You know, that pandemic led to hundreds of thousands of people missing school and work, which has huge real-life consequences. But don't forget, if you didn't actually do your self-isolation properly, there was a fine of £1,000, and with repeated misdemeanours it could go up to £10,000. Yeah. So they were also waving these fines around, which were supposed to scare.
And they were, as you say, they were laughing about it. And they used the phrase. I remember tweeting about, sort of joking about, oh yeah, when are they going to deploy the new variant? And he actually used in one of his messages talk about when are we deploying the new variants? He and his advisors. And we were joking about stuff they were actually doing. And this phrase, we frighten the pants off everybody. Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, does not come out of this well, talking about the need to use fear and guilt. There's one extraordinary bit in January 2021 when they're talking about getting more people to wear masks in the workplace, because Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, is saying, well, it was effectively free. it ain't free. Those people who were saying it wasn't a big deal were only wearing them on the way to Tesco for and for 20 minutes a day. They weren't wearing them all day, as many staff were. But he said it could force more people into compliance. The irony being, we know they didn't wear masks inside number 10. We know they didn't, and we know the parties were happening. We know that Simon Case was in charge of number 10 and was walking into parties and walking out again. And then there he is messaging glibly about forcing everybody in their workplaces to wear masks to increase compliance. There is a real them and us feel about these messages, isn't there? There's a real feeling that they really thought they were sort of above us, and we were just these... I mean, they were treating us like we were sort of naughty toddlers rather than, intelligent human beings able to make decisions ourselves. And this deliberate temper, which you put out beautifully in your book, A State of Fear, about how they absolutely set out to scare us, to pretend, which they knew. Everyone says, oh, well, we didn't know much at the time. We absolutely knew by March 2020 that this was a disease that mostly affected elderly people. The stats bear that
Absolutely.
out. 93% of those who died were over 70. Now, you wouldn't see that when you see the pictures because they always managed to find someone in their 20s or someone in their 50s. And there were those people, and those are tragic losses of life. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of people in this country, and certainly young people and children, were not at any serious risk at all from this virus. And yet they were imprisoned in their homes and had their lives destroyed.
Yeah, what you've just done there, Julia, is destroy the idea of the noble lie. At the moment, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. People don't want to face up to this. People should be angry about the hypocrisy and about the way they've laughed at us, the smugness, the sanctimonious attitude. They should be angry about that. But what they should be also angry about is the fact they were deliberately misled and deliberately frightened to follow the rules, like naughty children. You might tell a scary story to a child to make them behave. I'm not recommending that as a parenting technique, I'm just saying. And people should be really angry about this attitude of misleading us. You talk about the adverts. There was a barrage, a battery of weapons, cherry-picking data, worst-case scenario modelling. Do you remember the daily press briefings? People in authority figures in suits on raised podiums, surrounded by yellow and black chevron, which is supposed to look like a disaster area. The advertising, we had lots of black and white photographs, people in big masks, again the chevrons, scary, raspy voices saying that everyone can die. And they did tell us very early that everyone was at risk, Michael Gove, for instance. But the data was actually as early as February 2020, that risk was very stratified by age and clinical comorbidity. Now, that doesn't mean that this wasn't a really serious, terrible disease that killed millions of people globally. It was, but we were not all at risk. And putting everybody into the same category, well, we can see the effect it's had now on mental health and on the economy. There's a huge human cost to this. To those people think it's justified to frighten people, to make them follow the rules. You have to think very carefully about the kind of world you want to live in and the kind of government you want.
Indeed, and they were very glib, weren't they? They were very glib about this, and it was just very casual, the decision making. It was not based, and again we see the evidence where people like Whitty and Valance were saying do this, do that. But again, I'm not having any sympathy for them. I think they're as bad as everyone else because they went along and they stood at those press conferences when, they knew perfectly well that masks didn't make a difference. They knew perfectly well schools shouldn't be closed. They knew that. We know that because they'd already told us that in press conferences before mid-March 2020. If you go back to those press conferences, that was all that was said then. That was the truth, and everything after that pretty much was propaganda. I mean, this is the thing. The government then got trapped in its own propaganda loop, didn't it? Because they'd scared everyone so much, and there's international polling to show that actually the Brits were far more scared on average than those in other countries where they hadn't had these tactics deployed to such an extent. And then, of course, they couldn't come out a lot. They got forced into lockdowns because the public and the media were demanding it. The media have a lot to answer on this front. And then they got trapped in lockdowns. I mean, there's tweets emerged over the weekend, WhatsApps from Boris Johnson, making it clear they can't go too far ahead of public opinion. He wanted to come out of lockdown, he says, but he couldn't because public opinion wanted lockdowns. I mean, there are people who still now, polling shows half the country plus still now think that the lockdowns either were right or were not strict enough. This is terrifying, Laura. You know why? Because there is going to be another pandemic, and it probably is going to come sooner than 100 years' time. And the first thing that the media and the British public are going to demand is lockdowns.
Well, interesting, there was a study back in 2021 that showed that the act of lockdown itself made people believe more in the severity of COVID.
Because they wouldn't do it otherwise.
Exactly, because they thought, well, the government just wouldn't lock down unless it's that serious. So just the very act of lockdown cemented an idea. And cognitive dissonance is when your idea of reality isn't matching up to what you see in front of you. It's quite painful, and the brain will indulge in all kinds of defense mechanisms to protect yourself from seeing the truth. That's why with these lockdown files now, we're seeing people deny them outright. Oh, they can't possibly be true. Or minimize it by saying, oh, only certain messages being cherry picked. Or projection, they're making Isabel Oakeshott, who got the scoop, the subject to the story rather than the contents of the WhatsApps themselves. They're almost trying to protect themselves, I'd suggest, from the painful truth that we were lied to and
that they were conned
and it's really important to face that, to avoid it happening again.
No, but especially if you're one of the nice people, you're one of the good people, and you're pro-lockdown, and you're attacking people like you and me and Isabel Oakeshott and others who've been saying, look, this is far too much of an overreaction. By the way, none of us ever minimised the importance of COVID. I mean, I was ill with COVID in the first lockdown. I knew that it was an unpleasant disease, and I was certainly concerned for my elderly parents, but not for my child. I was totally glib about my child getting COVID because I'd looked at the risk analysis. But this is the thing. They're busy attacking us. We're granny killers, we're COVID deniers, all of that nonsense. To then accept that, you were lied to, you were fooled, and that we were right, that I think, and a lot of the journalists who've been criticising Isabel Oakeshott, and you know who you are, I think they can't accept that they were wrong.
Yeah, well, I think there's it's highlighting some journalistic shortcomings. If they're focusing on what Isabel earned or whether she signed an NDA, which are sort of minor, interesting details, but you'd come to them later, and they're not focusing on the contents, what it implies is that they maybe can't face they didn't ask the right questions at the right time. The other kind of fear that we're seeing coming through is the fear of the politicians about admitting they made mistakes, the fear for their own career. And this is very human and it's very understandable. But they were in such important positions of authority. And it's obvious that the power got to their head. Instead of thinking about the most vulnerable people in society, people who did lockdown and single room accommodation, or people who lost all their income or developed OCD and agoraphobia and still aren't back at school, instead of thinking the most vulnerable people impacted by their decisions, they were thinking about how to advance their own career and not look embarrassed by admitting they made mistakes. And that's been something that's been a very bitter pill to swallow, I think, reading these words. But people have asked me this week if I feel vindicated by the lockdown files, because it confirms research and interviews that I set out in my book, but I don't. Honestly, I've been choking on the words reading them. I feel sick to the stomach reading how they talked about us. I
feel exactly the same way. I'd like to think I'd be like, see, we told you. And actually, I've been in tears quite a lot of the time reading it because the frustration that we had this done to us. Laura Dodsworth, you've been a hero throughout this, and I know my audience will agree. Author of A State of Fear: How the UK Government Weaponised Fear During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Thank you for joining us.